Stand by. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Intermediate DRGR webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded. However, you will be muted until there are specific instructions for taking questions. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation via live meeting. These questions, along with the phone questions, will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please change your feedback box from green to purple to let us know that you have a question. The feedback box is in the upper right corner of live meeting. We will take questions throughout the at the end of the presentation, and you can ask that question by pressing star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. If your question has been answered, please remove yourself from the queue by pressing star, then 2. Once you finish asking your question via live meeting, please change your feedback box back to green. At this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Ms. Janine Cuneo, who will be leading today's webinar. Please go ahead.
Welcome, everyone, to Intermediate DRGR, and we are currently in DRGR in version 7.2, so all the information we'll be sharing with you today is current as of DRGR version 7.2. My name is Janine Cuneo. I'm with ICS. We also have on the line Mark Mitchell from HUD. Many of you know of him as what we all call DRGR guru, but he's ultimately the DRGR administrator for HUD and will be helping throughout the call as well as with the Q&As. To jump right in, the first thing I want to let people know is this is actually a series. This is the second in the series of DRGR webinars HUD is hosting. Last week we had the beginner DRGR on March 10th, and if you'd like to go back to that and review that or learn some more basics, you can go to the NSP Resource Exchange website, which looks like what is on the bottom screen. And at the Learning Center, if you go into the Learning Center, you will see the past webinar. You'll get to see the slides, the transcript, and the audio version of that webinar will be up shortly. The next in the webinar series for DRGR will be held on March 29th. This will be for troubleshooting problems specifically using the reports module. So we'll go in depth on the reports module, how to use it and the functionality, as well as using the reports to troubleshoot some of the common problems we're seeing grantees have in DRGR. For example, if they'd like to collapse an activity or some different scenarios around program income. So let's go over what we'll learn today. We're going to do a quick recap of the beginner DRGR just to make sure we're all at the same place for our basics. We're going to do an intermediate understanding of both the action plan module and the QPR module. We're going to do an in-depth look at drawdown, something we really didn't touch on very much in the beginner DRGR. And then last, we're going to do some quick tips and resources. Just want to review what you won't be learning today as well and where you'll be able to get this information. Specifically, we're not going to do a step-by-step instructions on how to enter data in DRGR, any of the modules. Really what you're able to do is go onto the ComCom or Community Connections website in the DRGR trainings, and you'll be able to find an online, very robust resource for that. You also will not get an in-depth reports module. That, again, will be on the 29th webinar. We'll go through that very in-depth as well as solving some of your common problems. Here's that ComCon or Community Connections website for you. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll be able to see the training slides for grantee screens as well for those of you from field office, there are field office screenshots that you'll be able to use and see as well. So let's jump right in. We're going to do first the recap of the beginner DRGR. Just to make everyone utilizing the same language, we have 4 modules in DRGR: the action plan, the drawdown, the QPR, and the reports. The action plan being really the most important, that we lay out the projects and activities, the budgets and the performance measures, proposed performance measures correctly in the action plan. The drawdowns is where one can obligate your funds. It's also where you'll be able to create, approve, edit vouchers, and look up voucher line item statuses. The QPR, or the quarterly performance report, is where one will summarize financial and narrative achievements per each quarter. It's also where one can receipt program income. Lastly is the reports module. This is not a mandatory module. Rather, this is a tool for you to use at the grantee level, where you're able to pull information off the DRGR action plan, drawdown, and or QPR to look up and or to view reports. For example, financial, administrative, or performer user account information will be able to be pulled straight off the system in a reports module. Just to recap a little bit about how one uses these modules, the action plan is actually a very dynamic module. What do I mean by that? You'll be going in and out of this action plan module and really working with your HUD field office rep. Literally, once you hit submit, it goes to the field office rep and they hit approve or reject, and this is a way in which you communicate updates and or changes to your program. Some examples of this: if you, for example, have a substantial amendment change in your NFP program, you'll need to report that and reflect that in your action plan for DRGR. If you don't have a substantial amendment change, but you still have a change to the program, for example, if you change your responsible organization, it's a place where you'll go in and change that. Also, if you didn't completely fill out your action plan the first time, you'll need to go back in, and most importantly right now, is there has been updates to the system, and grantees need to be able to go back in and update your performance measures in the system. For example, owner versus renter data, as well as multifamily versus single family. And I'll go into that in a bit and show you exactly what I'm talking about, but these are common ways in which you'll need to go back into your action plan. Your QPR is actually static at submission. What I mean by that is it only snapshots the 3 months in which the quarter is being reported on, and rarely, it's a pure exception that you'll ever go back into this QPR. It really is a snapshot in time. Your draws are also very dynamic, meaning you'll go in and out of your drawdown module so that you can pull it or draw down money as you need within locks, as well as obligate money as you need. And the reports module, very dynamic as well. You can pull reports as you need. Let's just review so we're again all on the same page. This is the basic layout of a DRGR screen that one sees. You have your main navigation bar on the top, and you'll notice the 4 modules that we have talked about: action plan, drawdowns, QPR, and reports are all on this main navigation bar. You also have your module title and your screen title that tells you exactly what you will be looking at in DRGR. On the left-hand side, you have a module navigation menu. This is per each module that you are in, you'll have different access into it, and you'll see those access points via your navigation menu. Please note that based on the responsibility that you as an individual have in the system, you will have a different module navigation menu. For example, someone that has the authorization to create a voucher will have a different module navigation menu than someone that can approve a voucher. So this is very individualized based on the user responsibility that you have in the system. And lastly, you have a utilities bar. There's a help index, and very importantly, also the log out. We recommend highly, if not mandate you to log out through this log out utilities index. The action plan for our review is a 2-tier hierarchy system. You first set up your projects, and then you enter your activities second, since they must be assigned to a project. For example, one would have Project 1 and multiple activities underneath that, Project 2 and multiple activities under that. Let's talk about the definitions of both a project and an activity. First, the projects. So projects should be your NSP eligible uses. As we all know by now, there are 5 eligible uses in Neighborhood Stabilization Program. A is financing mechanisms, B is acquisition rehab, C land banking, D demo, E redevelopment. Plus you would have a 6th project, which is administration. So let's do an example of the projects. For example, in one community, they tell me in their substantial amendment that they have a financing mechanism. They're going to be doing some acquisition rehab as well as administration. So they'd set up 3 projects. Then they would have multiple activities under each project. Let's talk about the definition of activities in DRGR. So an activity in DRGR, you should be breaking it out by 4 major elements. One is a responsible organization, really who's doing the work, a subrecipient, a developer, and or you yourself, the grantee. Another key responsible organization as well could be your consortia members for NSP2 recipients. An activity type, a national objective, and there's really 3 options for national objective in DRGR. There's what's called the LH25, or the 25% set-aside that you're required to meet, which is 25% of your funds have to serve households with 50% of the area median income or less. The low, moderate, middle income national objective, meaning the funds need to meet households serving 120% of the area median income or less. And then lastly is your administration or your admin national objective. And I know technically that's not a national objective, but for purposes of DRGR, those are your 3 inserts you would put in for a national objective.
Janine, this is Mark. I'm just going to interrupt real quick because what will show up, admin will show up as NA, not applicable for national objective.
Great. Lastly, we have is a multifamily building. HUD is asking that if you guys are working with multifamily buildings in your program, that each multifamily building needs to have a breakout. You're able to consolidate or collapse all of your single families into one activity based on a responsible organization, activity type, and national objective. But when it comes to multifamily buildings, each need to have its own activity. It is essential that these activities are thought through, specifically because your drawdowns, meaning the money you're going to be drawing from these activities, as well as your performance measures, all take place at the activity level. So your activity level is really your base of operations. So I just want to give an example of this. This is a community that I pulled from their action plan screen in DRGR. And we're able to see that they've broken it out right now. I didn't grab it all, but the ones I grabbed was administration, financing, and demolition. And just to highlight here, the project number and the activity number, those are both items that you're able to utilize yourself. You're able to name them how you would like. Same is true with the project title and the activity title. So some examples of that is for your project title, you can easily just put the eligible use of which you are breaking it out by. As well as when you do your activity titles, you may want to think about utilizing these naming conventions that you have the freedom to name so that you're able to easily recognize what's happening. So let's talk about this community in particular. They chose to use a project number of 310 for financing, and you'll notice in each one of the financing activities, we have 310. Also, for the actual specific activities, you'll notice that they broke it out also by responsible organization. So an example of a responsible organization for them was CPLC or CRHDC. And they also made sure they put that into the actual activity number and activity title so that they would always be able to clearly recognize that. Additionally, they broke out, as per recommended, to break out by a national objective, the LMMI or LH25 category. As you're able to see clearly, they title that very clearly, so they would always make sure that they noted this. I do recommend highly that you think through your activity naming conventions so that you're always able to see clearly, either when you pull a report or when you do your drawdowns, you're always knowing exactly what you're drawing down and or pulling a report, and you're able to read that very clearly. So think again through your naming conventions recommending highly you include a responsible organization and the national objective as part of those naming conventions. Another key issue is the performance measures. We went in depth with regards to direct benefit in the beginner DRGR. We're actually going to go in depth today about area benefit. But let's first review direct benefit. You'll be able to see an FHEO, or Fair Housing Equal Opportunity screens, which are in essence your race and ethnicity screens, and those come up at your QPR level. And those are going to be per activity that you set up. Except for admin, you will be required to report on those direct benefits if that's what you proposed in your action plan. Also in your action plan, you will be proposing owners versus renters and multifamily versus single family. Again, you propose those in your action plan, and then you report on the progress in your QPR. An example of this, if you note, example 1, they've chosen a direct benefit, and they're defining that based on households. If you notice, in the proposed beneficiaries, they have the number of households they're proposing. This example, they have now further broken out the households either by renter or owner. This example shows that they've broken out by renter. This activity is going to be a renter activity. And you'll notice now there's a line for renters that a community will need to fill out. Lastly, this is an example if you have both renters and owners as an example. You keep, the more checks you do, the more proposed beneficiaries you will fill out. And again, this is mandatory that you will need to be putting for each activity, if you're doing a direct benefit, your renters versus owners and or your multifamily or single family. Here's an example of a community that has chosen an owner activity, and they have chosen both multifamily and single family. Chose this specifically to let you guys know that as we've talked about before, you need to break out a multifamily and a single family. So one activity should never have both a multifamily and a single family clicked. You should really only have one or the other. QPRs, a little review as well. The 3 major areas of progress that you will report on in your QPR is financial, performance, and narrative. In financial, the DRGR automatically takes certain information from the system via the drawdown module and the action plan module on the last day of the quarter and populates that for you in the QPR. You are responsible for double-checking those numbers as well as adding your expenditures and your program income receipted. The performance progress you will be entering in DRGR once an end use is met. In essence, once a household is in the unit. And you'll report on both the performance measures as well as the addresses. Lastly is the narrative progress. I'd like to tell people to think about is describe your progress, or importantly, your lack thereof, towards your expenditure deadlines. This is an example of a performance progress based on one of the new screens. Again, as we noted, DRGR is constantly being updated so it can best serve you. And this is a new screen where you're required to put in race, ethnicity, female-headed household, and income levels. Again, you enter this information is when an end use is met. We're going to go into these screens as well as to help you a little bit if you need to do some prior period corrections later on in the webinar. This is just an example of a QPR. In the red boxes, this is the information that gets pulled straight from an action plan and or your drawdown module. For example, it tells your program funds obligated both per quarter and to date, and that information is drawn straight from a drawdown module. The blue boxes are the information that you need to enter yourself. Again, it's the program funds that have been expended to date, meaning the outlays that both you as a city have done, as well as the outlays external, i.e. the invoices and vouchers you've paid to, for example, a subrecipient, developer, or contractor, irregardless if you have drawn down that money or not. And additionally, HUD is recommending if you're doing any match or leveraging, you enter that data in as well as your program income received. And here's an activity description and location description. This both comes from your action plan. Why it's very important that you're setting up your action plans and including the narrative and location descriptions, because it will be seen every QPR going forward. As well as then you have the responsibility to enter in your activity progress narrative during that quarter. Here's additional more information on the QPR. On the red box again, this is information that is pulled to date. And then you have the information based on what you have proposed in your action plan gets pulled into the QPR. What do I mean by that? In the action plan, this community put in as a direct benefit that they will be having single-family units. They also put that these will be renter households. If, for example, you did not mean it to be renter or it's renter and owner, you have to go back to the action plan and choose that there. So you have to put your proposed in for single-family and or multifamily and renter and or owner at the action plan phase for it to show up your QPR to talk about your progress. And here we note that the community has said that they did 8 units, 8 households are in that, and therefore they have 8 addresses corresponding. So let's jump in. We've recapped the beginner DRGR, so we all have a basis of understanding. I'm going to jump into the immediate understandings of both our action plan and our QPR, focusing on the action plan first. So some key things we're going to go over today is the action plan math rules, some elements of the activity budget, activity type hints, some of the area benefit inputs, which is different from the direct benefit inputs, and some important note you need to think through on the sequencing of the action plan and the QPR. So action plan rules. This is to make sure you're thinking through the math correctly when you are entering in your action plan and or if you have to make any changes in the future. So your activity budgets should not be larger than the project budget they are attached to. And your individual project budgets and all the project budgets combined should not exceed the total amount of the grant. So your activity budget is less than your project budget, and your project budget and all the project budgets combined should be less than your total amount of the grant. Let me give an example on that. You might remember I often refer to my case study of the city of Zorro. This was part of our beginner DRGR. Just to recap quickly, the city of Zorro is doing financing mechanisms, acquisition rehab, as well as administration as their projects, and their activities in the financing mechanisms, for example, the LLRs, my shorthand for a loan loss reserve program, and as we note, the city is running that program, and they're going to meet both an LH25 and an LMMI national objective. Let me just walk through acquisition rehab as the project, as eligible use B. They're using a subrecipient number 1 that's going to be doing an AC rehab or acquisition rehab program for LMMI, single family. They have a subrecipient 2, or the second subrecipient, who's also doing an acquisition rehab program, but their program is going to meet both the LMMI and the LH25 national objectives. And then lastly, the city is choosing to going to be acquiring, rehabbing a multifamily property. However, that multifamily property is going to have units that meet both the LH25 and the LMMI categories, and hence needs to be broken out. Lastly is their administrative buckets. So let's just talk through this a little bit as the example of the city of Zorro. Let's say the city of Zorro has received $6 million as their NSP1 grant amount. They've chosen to set up, again, the project A for financing mechanisms, B for AC rehab, and their admin. Their acquisition rehab program is going to total $4.4 million. Their financing mechanisms will total $1 million. Their admin, $600,000, totaling $6 million, meaning the sum of these 3 projects can equal or be less than their total grant amount. It can never be more. The system will literally stop you and show an error. Now let's go by the activities. For example, for the projects, for project owner financing mechanisms, as we talked about before, they'll have 2 activities because it's one loan loss reserve program. The city is going to be running the loan loss reserve program. However, they have to break it out by LH25 and LMMI. That's their goal, is to serve both households. Each activity is going to have $500,000, totaling $1 million. Again, this $1 million cannot exceed the $1 million of projects. So both of the activities combined cannot exceed the project total. The same goes for the acquisition rehab math. Again, adding up all 5 of the activities that they break out cannot exceed the $4.4 million of the project. Those are kind of the basics of some math. Let's dig a little bit deeper here. The elements of an actual activity budget. In that, you'll have your hard and your soft costs of the activity, your activity delivery costs, as well as your failed acquisition cost. This is a very important component. Many people ask in NSP. We might have had what's considered a failed acquisition, and I would say that is not a derogatory statement, but rather you've had to incur some costs, maybe did an appraisal, maybe even open an escrow account, and for whatever reason could not close on that property. And those funds are allowed and are eligible in NSP, even if the property didn't come to fruition. And you'll need to make that part of your activity budget. Let's break that a little bit more. Let's actually give an example. The subrecipient number 1 for acquisition rehab, LMMI single family program, is set at $1 million based on the contract that the City of Zorro signed with this subrecipient. So things and elements of an activity budget will be the acquisition costs. Let's just say, for example, this community is going to be, the proposed is to purchase 6 homes, and they are averaging about $60,000. They'll also be having the rehab cost of those homes, disposition costs if you have any. For example, this community has chosen to pay for the closing costs when they sell it to a homeowner. Any activity delivery costs that may incur, for example, if a housing rehab inspector needs to go on site and view the property as well as monitor it as it goes through its rehabilitation, is a good example of an activity delivery cost, as well as any appraisals, termite inspections, escrows, etc. Lastly, we have the failed acquisition. And this could be costs, again, that are for appraisals, inspections, title reports, however, that do not equal a property that went to a homeowner. For whatever reason, it never got acquired or rehabbed. So the total of all of these costs will equal $1 million, and that will be the activity budget for the subrecipient. Again, a grantee is going to draw funds on a reimbursable basis. What I mean by that is once a grantee acquires a property, they can go ahead and pull down that money right away. A common question I often receive, though, is a grantee might not know what the end use is for the purposes of drawing down, i.e. they're not exactly positive if that property is going to go to a 25% set-aside or a low, moderate, middle-income household. So, for example, this could be a good case study where the subrecipient 2 is required via their contract with the City of Zorro that they will be doing $1.2 million worth of acquisition rehab costs, single family again, for the LH25 set aside, and they also will be doing an $800,000 for the LMMI. They're not, however, 100% positive who will be the end user. So some examples of how to work around that is, again, the written agreement stipulates that 40% of the total funds awarded to the sub must serve households at less than 50% of the AMI. So you can draw your funds on the assumed end use, and then once the end use is known, meaning once that housing unit is sold and you have the exact data on the household income, then you can internally reconcile, or you can revise your vouchers of those funds. You have 2 options there. Let me give you some activity type or category hints. One big thing is in the action plan you will see this called an activity type. When it gets produced in a QPR, you also see the verbiage activity category. These are the same exact things. And one example of that is a rehab or rehabilitation reconstruction of residential structures. And this is key for us to think about because that will include every single, let me skip ahead, every single cost that is associated to this activity. So again, I'm going back to the activity for the City of Zorro for subrecipient 1 worth $1 million. The rehabilitation, reconstruction of residential structures can be applied to every single one of these costs. It is a roll-up cost. Other examples of NSP activity types that are common are, again, administration, clearance and demo, construction of new housing, land bank acquisition and or disposition, and again, the rehabilitation, reconstruction of residential structures. The rest could be used as well, but these are some highlights that we're seeing as the most common, as well as the area and direct benefits that might apply. If you reported in DRGR different than the suggested breakout, for example, if you reported acquisition in one activity and rehabilitation in a second activity, there's kind of two options you can do. One is you can actually collapse these two activities in DRGR. If you have drawn money on one of the activities, you'll need to transfer those draws as you collapse it. And if you've reported any performance measures, you'll need to adjust those appropriately as well.
Janine,
go ahead.
Sorry, just one quick point. So then the only other things you'll have to do there, and we won't go into much detail, but is you'll eventually then, the final things would be to reduce the obligations on the activity you're transferring and then the budgets, the activity budgets, so that it all becomes back to the one.
Right. And just to give a little bit of a preview, we will actually be going over how to collapse these and give multiple case studies of collapsing activities and how you use your reports in order to help you through this process. As I know, a few of you that either Mark or I have helped with are looking to collapse your activities from 2 to 1 or maybe even 3 to 1, and we'll be going into detailed case studies on the March 29th webinar on that. The other option you have is many people say, well, Janine, I do have acquisition in one activity and rehab in another activity. Where do I report my performance measures? You're going to report them at the rehabilitation, your final end use. So at the rehab, you'll be reporting those if, for example, you have split out acquisition and rehab separate activities. So we've talked a lot about direct benefits. And again, direct benefits is the benefit that is going to be directly given to a household. Now, there is something called area benefit, meaning the benefit of the public dollars, the NSP dollars, will be helping an area-wide. This is rarely used for NSP. An example might be demolition. If your end use is demolition in and of itself for redevelopment purposes, that might be your only example.
Janine, sorry, again, acquisition is that biggest example of an area benefit activity. It's all that's allowed.
Thank you, Mark. And just to note here, then as if you're doing acquisition only for the sake of acquisition, but if you're doing acquisition with rehab also, that's where that collapsing of those activities might be a really good idea.
And that's one of the reasons we're saying if it's two activities always when you're setting it up, it's better to set it under that end use like rehab because you won't be able to, if you only wrote it as acquisition, you'll never be able to do quarterly accomplishments on that activity.
Let's go into the area benefit just in case this does apply. Again, we're going to go through this a bit quickly. I'm happy to take additional questions at the end or in what I talked about earlier in the Community Connections website in the training modules, it goes into this more in depth as well. There's basically two methods that you would assign for area benefits, the census method or the survey method, and you're able to do both in DRGR. The census, which we'll go through first, is you'll first be able to select your census as how to determine your area benefit. And then you'll have the option to either duplicate an activity. So, for example, if you have another activity in DRGR that also is using census, you're able to go straight into that activity or to that grant and then to that activity and copy that information. Or you can do it by service area, meaning it's an entire service area, it's a city or county-wide.
And real quick on the duplicate activity, all we're talking about is it's going to duplicate the census data. You're not going to be duplicating any other information other than the census data information on low mod.
Right. Again, you can choose selecting it jurisdiction-wide, i.e. the entire service area for determining your area benefit could be the city and or county-wide. Also, you can do it by specifically narrowing down into your census tracts, places, and block groups. Just an example here is how to break it out via your county codes, as well as then you'll be adding in your census tracts and places, and you can keep going through this process and get to your census blocks. This is just an example of what one would see to view your low mod calculation detail based on the input that you have put in there, i.e. your census tract that you have put in there. The second way an area benefit can be calculated or determined is based on the survey method. And then you're able to then insert your survey method and survey information into the screen by identifying survey geography.
So real quick, the only other thing that you'll be doing is there'll be a separate screen. I'm sorry, I forgot to include this here for low, mod, and total. So this allows you to identify the geography, of the area, but it won't pull any data. So you'll have a separate screen that'll actually say low, mod, and total.
And that will be based on the survey in which you as a city or county have conducted personally. So then you're able to input, as Mark was talking about, the survey data that you have. Let me talk about something that is very important because it can affect your ability to comply with your QPR deadlines. And that is the flow and the document status flow between your action plan and your QPR. So someone that might start, i.e. NSP3ers out there, before you've gone in and done anything, you will see it's going to say original in progress. That's going to be your action plan. That means it currently has never been submitted and is currently with the grantee, meaning the grantee has control over the action plan, inputting data and updating data. Once you feel that you have correctly done all that work, you will submit that to HUD. And then you'll see a submitted await for review as the status of this document. At that time, it's HUD's responsibility to review this document, and they'll have choices. One of the choices will be to reject that. And they will go ahead and once they hit reject, it will then have rejected await for modification. And it will be quote-unquote sent back to the grantee. At that time, the grantee will see something called modified, resubmit, when ready. If that status is up, that means, again, it is at the grantee's level. Grantee is the one that needs to go in and update and or modify the action plan so it can be resubmitted to HUD. This is an element that you will see a lot. You will often see modified, resubmit when ready. The reason why is that if you go into your action plan and you change some narrative, or you change a budget, or you have more information on a responsible organization like their address and you want to update your responsible organization's address, anytime you go into the action plan, it will change, meaning the document status will change to modified, resubmit when ready. You will often see your action plan in this phase. That means as a grantee, it is sitting in your inbox. It is at your responsibility to then resubmit it to HUD, and then they have the opportunity to review and approve it. Okay? So it's essential you always remember that once you have it in modified, resubmit when ready, you must still submit it to HUD for them to review and approve. If it is in the modified, resubmit when ready, you cannot submit your QPR. You're stuck.
Well, and let me make one comment on that too, Janine. The one thing some grantees get concerned about is the ability to draw, and so just want to clarify that it doesn't affect your ability to do draws, or obligations. So it's primarily getting it ready. You have to have that action plan ready in advance of having ready to submit the QPR.
That's great. The one thing I do want to let people know about, if you do have in your action plan and you don't have the correct budget. For example, you didn't budget for the full $1 million in that activity and you only have $500,000, and you need to go back in there again. You might get stuck in this process, and I'll give you another example when that does get stuck. But only if your budget isn't enough is the only time that this process can affect your draw potential. So once the action plan, and again, the action plan must be in reviewed and approved status for your QPR submission. And please note, if you're turning this in 2 days before your QPR is due, you're not leaving your field office very much time. So make sure you connect with them and talk with them about appropriate timing for them to have the chance to review and approve your QPR so that you can, or your action plan, excuse me, so that you can submit your QPR.
And just another quick note there is if there are just a few minor changes, it always helps to let your CPD rep know which activities are changed and just kind of direct them, and that way they can kind of expedite their review potentially.
Especially for you grantees that have many activities, because it doesn't show track changes or anything to a CPD rep on what you changed. Again, they just see a whole new document. So you'll definitely want to make sure you communicate with them clearly. So once it's reviewed and approved, a grantee can go through the QPR phase. I want to make it really clear that a community can start working in their QPRs at any time during the quarter, especially to receipt your program income. However, you're not going to be able to actually submit it until this reviewed and approved status is at your action plan. So kind of the flow of documents that happen at the QPR mimics exactly what you see in the action plan. Each QPR starts at an original in progress. Once that's submitted, it's submitted to wait for review as the document status you'll see. HUD has options. If they choose to reject it, it will be sent back to the grantee. They will be able to modify and resubmit it. Again, it will say submitted to wait for review, and then HUD has the opportunity to review and approve the QPR. Your QPR must be in reviewed and approved status for your action plan submission. So please remember that. Here's just a couple examples I wanted to show you just we pulled off now. Right now we have one example where it shows the action plan status as reviewed and approved, meaning they can submit their QPR. That it is an option for them to submit their QPR if they need to. The other two examples are those that you cannot submit your QPR because your action plan status either says modified resubmit when ready, which means that this grantee has done some modifications to an action plan and they need to resubmit it to their HUD rep, as well as rejected to wait for modifications, meaning this grantee needs to do some modifications to an action plan based on their CPD rep's review. Again, as Mark said, the last two, the modified resubmit when ready and the rejected to wait for modification, does not limit your ability to draw down. The only time that this would be applicable is if you need to increase your budget or make some budgetary changes in your action plan. But again, you should be able to do that, and you'll be able to submit it again.
And yeah, in all three statuses here, you'll be able to do that. It's typically when the QPR has been submitted but not taken action on that people have a hard time increasing their action plan budgets.
Great. So let's move on to some intermediate understandings of a QPR. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about corrections of data for prior performance periods, as well as how sequences of action plans affects the QPR a little bit more. So again, your activity level reporting is based on financial progress, performance progress, and narrative progress. We're going to focus again on the performance progress today. Again, as we went through a little bit earlier, your area benefit, as you'll be doing most of your census screens and survey screens at the action plan. Your direct benefit is where a lot of the work goes on at the QPR level. Once you have set up in your action plan, if you're going to be doing an owner or a renter, a multifamily or single family, it's really in the QPR in which you demonstrate your actual performance measures. So here's an example. The first screen that most people see in the QPRs, with respect to direct benefit, is the race, ethnicity, female-headed household, and what happens below this is the income levels. And literally, you're not able to continue past this first screen in an activity in QPR unless you've properly entered in that information. What we've noticed is happening is people are getting stuck because of prior period performance errors. And what happens is DRGR will check the cumulative totals, again, cumulative across QPRs, cumulative totals for total households from race ethnicity data, and compare it to the cumulative totals by income level. If these do not match, DRGR does display an error message and does not allow you to go to the next screen. The good point here, though, is QPRs now accommodate negative numbers, and you're able then to reconcile and rectify any prior period accomplishment errors that you need to put in.
And Janine, just a real quick note on those. The majority of the ones where it's prior period correction tends to be that someone's, grantee, or we have reselected a benefit type, like from households to renter households, and from housing units to something like single-family units. So it seems intuitive that they would be copied, but DRGR doesn't go back and copy the old data.
And we'll actually walk through an example of that going forward. I wanted to note very clearly as well is when you are on this direct benefit screen for households that you will not see the prior quarter data or your cumulative. You're only entering in current data. So what you can do if you need to see prior quarter data is you can do two things. One is you can do a view QPR screen to see the current quarter versus the cumulative totals, or you can pull from a reports tab two very good reports. One is Perf Report 1, which gives you your actuals versus proposed performance measures, as well as Perf Report 6, which gives you your FHEO data. I'm going to first show you your View QPR screen, what that could look like. This is an example of your View QPR screen for just the activity in which you are in, and it shows you both your cumulative actual totals and your expected, as well as your reporting this period. And it does it for your housing units. It does it, as you notice here, for total households, total owners, as well as some of the cumulative race totals that you have entered. This is key for understanding any prior period accomplishments that you need to reconcile. So if you are struggling with this, if you're trying to figure out you're not able to enter in the right data, actually Mark has made a really great spreadsheet for you to really walk through this process for yourself. If you ever get stuck at the screen, and many of you in the last quarter really did get stuck here, if you need to reconcile your DRGR beneficiaries for both projected and actuals, you can go into, again, this ComCon or CommunityConnections.org website, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to see guidance for entering direct benefit data, and specifically, you'll be able to see an Excel document that helps you walk through this process. And I'm going to do an example of that. So what you get in the Excel document is a three-part step process. And step A is it wants you to identify the totals from you the grantee, from the data you have collected for that activity. So ignore whatever's in DRGR. You just think through what do you need it to say. What end uses have you met for this activity? So if I walk through it, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, when you walk through it, Janine, we were missing the total on the race ethnicity.
Oh, thank you. Excuse me about that. I'll make sure I will note that. So here, let's just give an example. This is what the community is saying, that this met an end use for this activity for renters, low income, and it's a multifamily unit. You'll notice as well that we've totaled up the race and ethnicity based on renters again. And I apologize, this is an error of mine that we do not have the totals down here either. We will correct this slide for posting on the website. So those should all be entered in as well. On the next screen, you'll have the step B in this process. And step B in this process is when you pull these performance reports, again, performance report 1 and 6, you'll be able to collect the data that's already in DRGR for this activity.
And real quick, the other thing that Janine mentioned just a second ago is really helpful too. If you haven't put any data in the current quarter, probably the easiest thing to do is look at the last QPR. Instead of having to pull those two separate reports, you can just print the prior QPR, for that activity.
Great. So let's say, for example, you have in there that you have your low income as 6 and your moderate income as 2, and you've done 8. However, in your housing units, you said 10. So a lot of kind of differences and errors there. You never categorized renter versus owner, nor any race ethnicity data. This definitely happened a lot because in the new release of DRGR, when it was a 7.0 release, all this information was new. You're now able to classify renters versus owners, single family, multifamily, and race ethnicity. So you never had an option to put these in before. So that's why we didn't see a lot of this prior, because there wasn't that option for you. This is why it is essential you have to go back in. The third step in the process is, again, in this Excel spreadsheet. It automatically demonstrates for you what numbers you need to enter. And again, as I said in QPRs, now you're able to put negatives in so that you can reconcile the numbers. So for example, it tells me exactly the numbers I need to enter into my QPR for it to equal what I want it to equal from step A. Lastly, I just want to go back to our document status flow. Just remind you guys that often you will see in your QPR status flow the submitted await for review. Again, that's when you as a grantee have submitted the QPR to HUD, and at that point you're not able to you're not able to submit your action plan. You're in a holding pattern for that. So again, communicate with your rep, and if you are needing to get your rep to approve that, you'll note that by it being in the submitted await for review document status, and you'll need to communicate with them on asking them to review it timely if you need to make any action plan changes. Let's go into the drawdown module a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about obligating funds, creating vouchers, revising vouchers and line items, approving and rejecting vouchers, revoking approval of voucher, as well as canceling vouchers. We're also going to talk about what action needs to be taken on draws over a certain threshold for NSP. The first thing I do want to do is walk you through the voucher process options. This is just something I want you guys to think about and utilize as a tool walking away from this webinar on how really the process works in the vouchers. You have both a voucher creator and a voucher approver. It's really important you know that a creator cannot be an approver cannot be a creator for NSP grantees. Your first step is you always need to obligate your funds. Again, you're obligating based on the budget that you have entered in at the action plan phase. So if you ever need to make budget changes, you have to go back to the action plan. When you get to the drawdown module, it's all based on the number that you entered in at the activity level in the action plan. So first you're going to obligate, and you can update your obligations by the creator or the approver, and these are the steps in which 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 are the steps in which you would take to obligate those funds. Next, after obligation, you're able to create a new voucher. You'll notice only the voucher creator is the one that is able to create new vouchers, not an approver, just a voucher creator. And this gives you the steps and exactly how you work through the draws down, or how you actually voucher create. And I'm going to go through those in a second as well. Once the voucher is created, it is submitted to the voucher approver, and then the voucher approver has the option to approve each voucher and each line item of the voucher. If you have existing vouchers, you either can search those existing vouchers or you can revise those existing vouchers. Every time you do a revision, that revision goes to the voucher approver. Again, if you revise the voucher, it's a two-step process just like the new voucher. Obligating vouchers, this is going to be done again by either creator or an approver. You'll notice that I'm in the drawdown module screen. How you know that is by this yellowish, orangish color, and you'll be able to search for obligation. You'll do that by the grantee number, and or you can always just hit search and all activities will show up for you in your system. This is an example of what someone did. They just searched by the grant number and all of their activities showed up in this system, and they are able to maintain it, and then they walk through the obligation process. So you'll notice now we are in the activity obligation line item screen. So for that particular activity number, so we have the grant number and the grantee activity number which they chose, you're able to obligate a certain amount. Please note, we got to go back to the math rules. You'll notice the total budget is $10,000 for an action plan. The total obligation amount $400 at this point, $400, and they now have the remainder of that available for obligation. Let's give an example. We're going back to my famous City of Zorro example, and we're going to use one of the acquisition rehab activities, the subrecipient number 1's acquisition rehab LMI single family for $1 million budget that was set up in the action plan. So let's just talk about the math rules as it applies to that activity. An obligation amount must be less than or equal to the total budget and greater than or equal to the total draw amount. You can never decrease the obligation amount to less than the amount that has already been drawn. So let's give this as an example. You have your total budget for this activity at $1 million that was set up in the action plan. At this point, the community can obligate $500,000, which has to be less than or equal to the total draw amount. The obligation amount of $500,000 can never be less than the $200,000 draw, and your budgeted amount can never be less than your obligation amount. So just think of this as kind of a cascading effect. Your budget is the highest number, your obligation is either equal to or less than the highest number, and the draw amount is equal to or less than the highest number. You can never draw an amount that has not been obligated, and you can never obligate an amount that does not have a budget. Let's talk a little bit about how to draw down. So the necessary role for creating a voucher is a request drawdown or a voucher creator. You'll notice here that in the module navigation bar, if you are a voucher creator, you will see this Create Voucher line that you're able to click. If you do not have that, that means you are not a drawdown requester, or when you signed up, you did not spell that out and ask for that in particular, and you'll need to go back through your CPD rep if you are supposed to have this voucher creator status. Remember, again, if you are a voucher approver, you cannot be a voucher creator for NSP grantees. So to create vouchers in DRGR, the first rule is you'll go ahead and you'll need to add the activities in which you want to pull down the money from. You might remember I said all activities are going to be where you do your draws from and also where you record your performance measures. So this is the example of how you draw your money based on the activities you set up in DRGR in the action plan. You can add as many activities as one would need with regards to drawing down. You select your activities to include in the voucher. You can select either your program funds, which are in essence the grant funds that you've been awarded, or any of the program income that you have received. We're going to go really into a real in-depth on program income with respect to our next webinar on the 29th. But please note here, for your program income, we will talk a little bit later about how to receipt that and also how that receipt will be shown in the draw. After you've selected all of the line items in which you want and based on program or program income funds, you'll be able to add those selected activities to create a voucher. You'll then also be able to, per each line item, enter in the draw amounts. You'll note here, though, available amount. If you do not have any money in the available amount, that either means you've already drawn the total amount of your budget, or you have not obligated enough money. So you'll need to double check those two items. So on this example here, a community can actually only draw from the first activity because that is the only activity that actually has an available amount to draw from. This is when you want to approve and or reject a voucher line item. So once someone has created the voucher, that will be now available for the voucher approver. That's your necessary role, the approver of the drawdowns. It's your necessary role in DRGR. And they're then able to, by each line item, approve or reject that. They also can see a little bit more if you need to see more in the view status. And they'll get a report like that, and they'll be able to hit the action of approve, 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 and or reject. Once that is approved, that will be then sent through HUD to LOCKS for access to a grantee's individual line of credit for that grant, and the money will come Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen it come as soon as a day or a day and a half, and usually no longer than 3 or 4 days.
Typically what I hear from grantees is 3 or 4 days.
Okay. Also, you're able to revoke approval of a voucher if you need to as well. Let's talk a little bit about the drawdown math rules in the voucher, and I'll give you a case study as well. And we're only going to focus on the program funds first. I'll focus a little bit later on the program income. So for the program fund drawdown, you'll take the available amount in the activity, and that's going to be your obligated amount minus your draw amount that you're requesting, plus any draw pending amount. Let's give an example of that. Again, going back to our City of Zorro, $1 million subrecipient number 1 activity acquisition rehab activity. Let's say the budget, as we know, is $1 million. They've obligated $500,000 of it. They've drawn to date $200,000 based on past draws, and there's actually a draw pending of $50,000. For example, if they just submitted yesterday a draw of $50,000 and it has not gone through the lock system yet, so they have a pending draw still. So as we know, as the voucher math, your available amount that you're able to draw down is your obligated amount minus draw plus draw pending. So for example, $500,000 is obligated right now in this $1 million budget line item. They've drawn to date $200,000. They have a $50,000 draw pending. So right now the available amount they had to draw from this budget is $250,000. If you get this $250,000 and you're not able to do and this math doesn't seem right, walk back through and double check your obligations, your draw to dates, and your draw pending for that activity. Many of you might need to revise a voucher line item. There are several reasons people revise a voucher line item. We're actually going to go in depth in our next webinar on March 29th, how to revise a voucher line item. And more particularly, especially when you're collapsing activities, meaning when you're wanting to combine your acquisition rehab program into one activity versus maybe 2 that you had before, but you have some draws that have already been done on one of those activities. So this is an example when someone will revise a draw. And although it's simple in DRGR, literally meaning the revision process is not very hard in the drawdown module, you actually have to think a lot about the math that you need to do to get yourself to an ability to revise. So I'm going to talk today literally about the revision, how to revise, and then the March 29th I'll give you a couple of case studies of an example of when someone revises a voucher line item and the math that you need to think through for that.
And just a quick reminder, the only people that, again, that will see that revised link are anybody with a Create Voucher role.
Great. So like the new vouchers, again, any existing vouchers that need to be revised, it's a 2-part process again. It's the creator and then the approver. So they will see, once they find the voucher line item in which they want to revise, they'll have the option to revise it. Then they'll go to the screen that gives them a lot of information about this line item. It tells you DRGR information, LOCS update, LOCS confirmation numbers. It will show you and demonstrate to you that this voucher has pulled money from LOCS and that money should be with you at the grantee level. It also tells you information about the line item in general, not just the grantee activity number, but the responsible organization, making sure it came from the fund type. Remember, it's either a program fund or a program income fund that someone drew down money from, as well as the draw amount. Then a grantee that wants to revise this can designate new activity, the new activity in which they want to draw this, they want to revise this money to, and then they'll enter the dollar amount to revise. And you can revise part of this or all. So for example, with this case, the city drew the money from their admin activity, and let's say it was an error, this $21,451, there was an error in their financials and they realized, oh no, actually $20,000 of this $21,000 should have been for their acquisition rehab program. They drew this down incorrectly, and they need to go in and revise the voucher and have that $20,000 go to the correct activity. You're able to come to the activity, move funds to another activity box, find that activity in which you want to revise the voucher to, enter in the amount that you need to revise, either in full or in part of the drawdown amount. It can never exceed the drawdown amount, though.
If I could just talk one more example, one of the reasons we talk so much about setting up your activities correctly in the beginning is if you have to split activities, say an example like Janine mentioned earlier, the multifamily. Say you set up the activity as one activity for all multifamily and there was really 8 complexes. If you've already done 10 draws and that you did, on each 8, that means you're going to have to actually use the screen 80 times. So, because you'd have to split those prior draws. So that's why we try to spend so much time ahead of time making sure that the activities are set up as well as possible. And one of the things we will be doing in the next round of enhancements is a screen that will allow you to split these out as opposed to having to do it over and over in each screen over and every time.
Great. Excuse me. Another item you can do in the system is to cancel a voucher line item. You're really only allowed to cancel a voucher line item is if this line item status shows open, approved pending headquarters, or approved by headquarters. Only when those line items can you actually cancel a voucher. Again, the necessary role for this canceling is a person that can request a drawdown, aka the creator. Let's talk for a second about the draw thresholds. The draw limit for NSP is $5 million. If a grantee's draw request amount exceeds the limit set for the grantee, that draw request will route to HUD for review, and it will show a status of approved pending HQ or headquarters. If a grantee does see this status, they must email supporting information for that draw request to CPD reps. And support documentation may include an invoice or purchase order in order to demonstrate what this draw entails. It has to provide sufficient detail to demonstrate that the DRGR draw request was created and reviewed by 2 separate staff persons at the grantee level and approved in accordance with any grantee procedures. And then once the voucher line item exceeds the threshold, they'll be required also to have approval, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, by the HUD DRGR administrators to ultimately complete the voucher.
Well, it's close. It's not HUD system administrators. We do have just a few folks up at headquarters for those, and typically, for NSP, it's been Jennifer Hilton so far. Great.
So if any of the CPD reps also need to connect, they can connect with Jennifer Hilton. One last thing I just want to point out here, and again, our document status and flows, we've talked a little bit about this already, but a grantee can draw down funds at any stage of an action plan or QPR. If a grantee needs to change the budget of an activity in the activity of the action plan or QPR at the submitted await for review, the grantee can't alter their budget. And so if you ever need to increase it, or if you need to, for example, consolidate some activities, you'll want to make sure you have your action plan and your QPRs both in the reviewed and approved status, and or your action plan can be in the modified resubmit when ready status. So you have access to it and you can move around freely and easily. I like to call this the great exception program income right now, just because it acts and feels a little bit different in DRGR. I do want to note that I know Mark has mentioned before that they are making some updates to DRGR to make it easier for the program income module to happen. And I believe, Mark, those updates will be coming in the summer is the goal?
Yeah, the goal would be late summer.
Great. So right now this is applying from now until the late summer. So the program income should be reported in the QPR in the quarter in which it was received, and grantees should enter program income received in the activity it was received under. So if you have an acquisition rehab program for subrecipient number 1 for the LMI category, and one of those properties have been sold and you receive the proceeds of that sale, and that's your program income, you'll want to receipt that at that activity level. Once that information is saved in the QPR, again, you're going to receipt that information at the QPR. Once it's saved there, then the grantees, you are able to draw down on that when you're creating your voucher. And program income is drawn down on through the drawdown module. And the protocol is no different than what is done with the NSP grant funds. You're just using program income funds, not program funds. And please also remember that you, once you receive that information in a certain activity, in the activity in which the program income was received, you now have the ability to draw down in any activity. So you're receiving it in one activity, and now you have the ability of DRGR to draw it down in any activity. I'm going to walk you through an example here. This is an example of a QPR where you'll see a program income received, and you're able to enter in the most current in-quarter estimate of your program income received, and you're able to save your QPR activity. Many people ask me, but Janine, I don't do my QPRs until the end of the quarter. You're able to go into a QPR and save it at any time you would like. I don't mean submit, you're just allowed to save it. And once you save it, then that money becomes available in your drawdown module.
So the only awkward part here is if you've increased that program income during the quarter, you'll have to go back into that one activity and just kind of override it until that end of the quarter.
Right. So let's give an example here. Again, this is the drawdown module, and this is when you want to program income disperse, or when you quote-unquote want to draw down the program income. You want to demonstrate that that's what you're doing at a grant level. You'll be entering in that program income. You want to select the program income per each activity in which you want to draw it down in order to create your voucher. This is, again, an example of a voucher that someone has created that includes both program funds and program income, and there's two line items that include program income. You'll notice that the available amount is the same exact in both, and the reason for that is you, at some point, this grantee entered in or received their program income of $204,000 plus some change. They now have the ability to draw a combined total of $204,000. That does not mean in one activity you can draw $204 and in another activity $204. It means the combined total of your program income draws is $204,000 plus some change. So let's talk a little bit about the math rules for program income. And program income is available amount equals the sum of all program income received minus your drawn program income. Again, you're reporting your program income received in the QPR.
And the biggest distinction here on that slide, again, is just to remember, like Janine's mentioning, that on the program funds, it's always going to be, those amounts are on the activity level. Program income is always going to be at the grant level.
Great. So let's actually give an example of this. Let's say the grantee has received $304,426 of program income received. They've already drawn to date $100,000 of their program income in the drawdown module. So if we do the math correctly, they have available to draw the $304,426 that they've received to date minus what they've already drawn, which now equals the $204,426. Please notice, though, that they have been available for each activity. The total of the activities that you're drawing down your program income equals the available amount in total. So I give an example of that activity 1. They can draw, for example, 154, and activity 2, about 50,000. You're able to continually increase your program income received as it comes into the grantee, as Mark was stating. You'll just have to override if you're doing multiple in-quarter program income receipts. We're going to do an in-depth case study on some of the common problems someone has with program income in DRGR on the 29th, as well as give some tips and tools to how to do it, for example, if you're setting up a revolving loan fund with your NSP program income. So let's talk a little bit and outline some quick tips and resources for you, and then we'll start taking some questions. So I just want to talk about a common problem that we see is many times we hear people saying, I'm not assigned to a grant properly. As a user, I'm having problems with access for a variety of reasons. So, for example, many users might assume that they are automatically assigned to a grant when they register for DRGR through their CPD field offices. And that's just not true. What happens is in DRGR, every grantee has a grantee administrator, and they are the ones that must assign each user to the grant. So just because HUD has said, yes, you have permission and you can become a user in DRGR, it's the grant administrator for your city, county, consortium, and or state that actually has to assign you as a user to each grant. So if you're not assigned and you're having problems accessing the grant, first go to your grant administrator and see if they've done that. And in the beginning DRGR slides, we showed how a grant administrator actually can walk through that step. Another issue that may have arisen because they're not being assigned to a grant properly is that many users assume that they don't need to define properly the role they need to have. So for example, if a grantee or user really needs to have the ability to approve vouchers but didn't tell their field office that and didn't tell headquarters that, they might not then be given the proper responsible user account to approve drawdowns. So they'll need to go back through their field office and ask for an actual approved drawdown account. And this is just a little bit of a cheat sheet for you on what each responsible user has the ability to do. For example, if you're a view-only grantee user, you have very limited, you can just view your action plans, view your QPRs, and view your reports. I found that actually some grantees really like to have that role only if, for example, it's a director level and they don't really need to get into it for drawing and approving. Or also I've seen that if you're, for example, a consortium member, some people are wanting to have some access to see a QPR, see an action plan, but don't actually are going to get in there and do any draws or approvals. Again, we are going to go through the reports module. This is an example of a great report you can run. This tells us the program income received and program income dispersed very easily and cumulatively, and we're going to walk through the reports module in a couple weeks. We usually try to close most of our DRGR webinars with this information about who do I talk to if. We found that once people get empowered by knowing who to call and who to talk to, they really can increase their knowledge quite substantially. So let's just give you some examples. If you need to do a password reset or the DRGR system is down, you can contact the HITS help desk. If you need to have a session reset or you're having other technical assistance questions or problems, you can go to the DRGR help desk. You can email the DRGR_help@hud.gov. And that in particular, if you're specifically seeing, for example, you're trying to do something in DRGR and it keeps giving you an error screen, you're going to want to make sure that you send screenshots to this email address so that the person receiving this can understand and see exactly what you're seeing and some of the errors that you're seeing. A great place, too, for some of those technical assistance questions that you might have is you can go through the DRGR question lookup system, and again, that's going to be posted online here at this website, and that's through the ComCon or CommunityConnections.org website. And that gives you a whole host of different answers that have come out based on commonly asked questions.
And it is the same type of resource that the help desk is using. They might have more experience with particular issues, but they're using that same lookup tool.
Right. If you're a grantee and you're missing information in the logs, for example, your tax identification number, your bank routing information, please call your HUD CPD rep. Especially that seems to be true if there's a new grant, for example, NSP3 grants. If you have more than maybe a quick question, or you're needing someone to do kind of intensive one-on-one with you for a few hours, for example, if you're wanting to collapse some activities and really need and want to walk through that with someone, a great resource for that is on the NSP Resource Exchange, and you can request assistance for DRGR right here. You also can request assistance for a whole host of other issues as well to get a few hours of assistance. For example, if you're wanting to do a lease purchase program, you can request assistance here. There's also some DRGR questions here as well under the Ask a Question, so feel free to use that as a resource as well. Lastly, these are just great websites for you to use and or email. So again, we have the DRGR Help email. We have the official DRGR Help site, and that's on the HUD.gov. That gives you some different manuals like the reports manual is on there, how to do reports. If you want a step-by-step for drawdown manual, for the drawdown module, there's a great report on that, or a great manual on that as well. ComCon or CommunityConnections.org has some great step-by-step manuals and trainings as well. This is also where that lookup system that we were talking about is. You can do some FAQs and review those. And lastly, the NSP Resource Exchange, which I talked about in this previous slide here at hud.nsbhelp.info. And you're able to request assistance. There's FAQs. This exact webinar with the audio and transcripts will be housed there, as well as the past webinars. There was a great webinar on January 20th also on DRGR about the performance measures and the new screens that you're seeing in the FHEO, the race ethnicity screens, and the owner versus renter as well. We've kind of come to our close here. One important thing, and you'll see this at the end as well, is if we can get you to fill out a few short questions to get some feedback about if this was helpful, as well as if you want more or less DRGR support in the future via webinars. And maybe we'll take we have some good amount of time to answer your questions. And Todd, would you like to start doing that for us?
Sure. Do you want to start? Are there any questions in the queue, or do you want to start with the written-in questions?
Why don't we see if anybody's called in first?
And currently we do not have any questions on the phone line, but as a reminder to everyone, that is *1 if you'd like to ask a question over the phone.
Okay, the first written-in question is, someone was originally advised to set up one project, and then each activity is what you're actually describing as projects. Do I need to update all of my entries to reflect the process you're describing? I think this had to do with earlier on in the webinar with projects and activities.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you right, and we've seen this before, that especially early on with NSP moving so quickly and some guidance not all being at the same place for people, that it sounds like for this example that my definitions of projects versus activities might have gotten mixed up a little bit, and that they actually put the activity definition at the project level, and then had maybe an activity one from that. Mark, do you have any strong advice? What we've been talking a lot about for people is you can do a couple of things, and it really matters where you are in the program. You know, if you're at the end of your NSP1, it might not behoove you to do that, but rather to maybe define better the activities you have set up and have really strong narratives there, as well as making sure 100% your performance measures are correct and are located in the correct way and are not double counted. Those are the places you'll want to make sure that you do have correct if you maybe not had your projects and activities set up the way in which we've described today and as recent.
Well, then let me make one distinction. That's one of the areas I see the most confusion for newer grantees, is that if you know who is actually administering an activity, and I mean who's actually running it, and it's not going to be multiple organizations, that usually means that the information's at the activity level. So sometimes if you're still at the point where you haven't allocated all the funds, then it's going to stay up at the project level. But typically what goes into published action plans tends to be projects if it's just grouping of funds. So we do see that where people put it all the way down to the activity level. Smaller grantees, it might be a one project to one activity, or a lot of times a one project to maybe two, if there's like the split on the national objective. But it's pretty common, but the main thing is you don't put in, that when you get to the activity level that you do have the right level of detail. In terms of that you have it down to the responsible organization and all those different breakouts that Janine said. So if you don't know those breakouts yet, the things will still be at the project level. Once you do, we need it at the activity level. And typically the first activity we see a lot of times before people make awards is going to be administration. People will need to draw their admin funds first.
If you're still confused and or want someone to review it, probably the best resource you can go to for that is the NSP Resource Exchange, which is on the screen right now, the hud.nsbhelp.info, for someone to kind of review that and give you an insight on what you're seeing and what maybe some of the exact things you'll definitely want to make sure you have in there if the projects and activities were not set up based on the definitions today we've talked about.
Yeah, because the NSPTA providers and even your local field offices can also pull action plan spreadsheets, to say how other similar grantees have set theirs up. So they can work with you to see, what are some other examples, of people that are trying to do things in a similar way.
Okay.
And we do have several questions in the queue on the phone line. Are you willing to take those at this time?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, our first question then comes from Mario Moton with Shelby County Department of Housing.
Yes. I want the one that you talked about earlier. We have our acquisition and our rehab is broken out in DRGR. And I was just trying to figure out when we do our actual versus our proposed numbers, they're double. Do I need to do anything to my action plan in order to correct that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mario. You're not alone. So he's talking about when he has his activity. There's two different activities for acquisition and rehab. He has an acquisition activity, a rehab activity. And Mario, I'm assuming that means for the same responsible organizations for the same national objective.
Right, correct.
Great. So if that's being done, you again have these two options of collapsing that into one. So basically moving, for example, your acquisition activity into your rehab activity. The second option is keeping it how it is, but not double counting. And I think that's what specifically you're thinking about. What you'll want to do in the proposed for the acquisition is you will not want to enter any proposed units, counts there, etc. Those will remain zeros in proposed and in actuals. It's in the rehab where you will be counting those proposed as well as actuals.
And one thing you can do to make sure that anybody that looks at those activities, understands those relationships is put a little something in the activity description to say, just make a little statement that says that those, the properties for one or households will be counted under another activity. So that way anybody reading it or an auditor or whoever will be able to see those linkages. They won't question you, well, why don't you have any performance measures for that activity?
Okay, and also though, but a lot of those numbers have already been put in under my acquisition. How do I go in to take those numbers out?
Great question as well. You'll have to do your prior period performance corrections. So you'll want to go through your QPRs and figure out your cumulative totals for what you've put in over the past QPRs for your acquisition. And at your next QPR, you're going to put negatives in there so that it will equal a total of 0. And so you can either do one of two things. You can kind of go back through your past QPRs, or what I advise also is to pull the performance report number 1 as well as number 6, just double check and see what you've put in there in the past, and then you're able to figure out what negative you need to put in there.
And again, when you do that, go ahead and put something in your progress narrative to explain it so that way people don't wonder why you're doing it.
Okay. So nothing has to be done to the action plan?
Well, if you got projected numbers, we could actually back those out too. But the main thing would be to look at both of them, see what you need to do. The most important are going to be the actuals, but the projected would be good to clean up too.
Yeah.
Which appropriation are you, or NSP 1 or 2?
NSP 1.
Okay, yeah.
I do recommend, as Margucci, that you do also go back to your action plan for your proposed, and you zero those out as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So you make that clean for this coming QPR. And as Mark stated, really, really important to put in your narrative what you were doing, so that it's very clear for trails, for your reps, audit trails, et cetera, of where that acquisition activity is connected to, which other activity it's connected to, meaning the rehab activity.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's what I need to know.
Our next question will come from Tracy Clayton with Prince George's County, Maryland.
Yes, hi. My question is, we had a situation where I guess we had some sort of miscommunication. We have a sub-grantee who we actually have an agreement with, and we stipulated in the agreement that they would hold on to the program income. But I think before we discovered all that, we got some guidance from I think, Community Connections. And they pretty much said if your agreement says that they can keep the program income, then they can keep the program income. My question is, before we found that out, we did a drawdown and we kind of receipted program income and applied it. Is there any way to reverse that at this point?
Mark, do you know that? I don't know if we can reverse program income.
Well, yeah, the actual draw, because we actually needed to have drawn entitlement and not program income.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to apologize because I was actually answering a DRGR help email when we were talking.
Okay.
Could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
Okay. I guess I'll just say bottom line is we need to be able to fix a draw that was done mistakenly. We drew down program income instead of entitlement. We need to be able to fix that. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically you're going to have to revise draws or offset them. So, I mean, if you recorded program income dispersed in the drawdown module?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and it wasn't actually dispersed. Well, you would probably just, yes, I think it's going to be easier to fix the program income than it is actually, you'll actually have to just do a draw, for the actual program funds. And then we'll have to correct the program income draw.
So can I call someone to kind of walk me through that?
Probably, we'll have to do it, because I don't think the help desk will be, we'll have to look at the individual situation just to make sure that you're doing it for the correct way. So,
okay.
Email me, and I'll try to work through that one. But if you can send me, the draw information, it doesn't have to be a screenshot, but at least the draw numbers and explain that, so we are just super sure that we're doing it the correct way.
I did go through the help desk, and they weren't sure it could be done, so they were doing some research, but that's been a little while.
Yeah, well, I do think we'll just have to be super. Anytime we're talking about changing draws, I don't think that, again, it's not something you can just change. You can revise draws within a fund type. You can't revise them across.
Okay.
So that's where you would, if you haven't drawn the money down, we'll have to do a draw probably for it, and then we're going to have to figure out what we need to do about fixing the program income draw, so that it's, typically when we talk about offsetting draws or revising them, typically it tends to be on the program fund side. So we'll just need to double check what we need to do and what our options are on the program income side.
Okay, and your email address?
It's mark.mitchell@hud.gov.
Okay, thank you.
And our next question will come from Stephanie Gingrich with Kent County.
Hi. As I'm listening, my question is whether the current instructions that you've given today kind of cancel out what we were told earlier about if we were double counting addresses that somebody at HUD would be consolidating those. Are we now supposed to go in and are we going to be told whether we specifically need to collapse activities, or should we assume that we should collapse activities if we have separate activities currently for rehab and acquisition?
I guess I had not personally heard that HUD's going in. So, Mark, do you have recommendation on that? I am not.
No, I think at one point Jesse mentioned probably that we were going to try to do that. The issue is that we won't know which ones to work on, so it's always going to be better. I think what we're doing is we are having to process tons of information requests from Congress, from GAO, and things like that. So what we're doing is we're trying to manually clean those up when we're doing analyses, but we don't know which ones. And we wouldn't go in and change yours. So we'll have to try to track that down to make sure, that we're not getting out the wrong information. But for the most part, we're not going in and editing your activities for you. So I think one of the things we were trying to suggest was that we certainly didn't want you to have to back things out if you had done them too early, and you were getting ready to do them later. We were trying to give advice, and this is where it gets confusing to say from going from the point forward when we talked that we didn't want you to put things in too early. We didn't want you to do things across if you didn't have to, but we understand that there's been a lot of conflicting guidance that has been out. We've got a lot of players here now with TA providers and all the different field offices and headquarters, and then even different people at headquarters. So the main thing we would want to do is to look to see how many you have, and how many activities you need to do. But Janine's guidance about, removing, performance measures, this is one of the first times I think I've heard people talk, make that proposal, Janine, but it makes sense, rather than collapsing activities, as an option. So what we probably should do is look through your particular instance and see what makes the most sense for you.
Okay.
And probably for that kind of individual guidance, Mark, if you don't mind me saying, probably the best place for that resource is at that NFP Resource Exchange. You'll be able to kind of take some time with a TA provider. It's not really an error report or an error issue you're trying to get through quickly or things like that. Might be the best place for you to request some assistance if you need to think through that and talk with someone about that.
Okay, and then to come to the webinar on the 29th about how to collapse projects.
Yes, we're going to do an in-depth collapse. I'll probably give about 2 or 3 different case studies of collapsing on how to think through how to collapse with regards to if you have draws and obligations and projects versus activities, et cetera. So we'll walk through that.
Okay.
So do we have some of the emails?
I think maybe we should take some email questions or non-phone call questions.
Let's switch for a little bit.
Sure. The next question asks, why can't you revise amount expended the same way you can revise drawdown amounts? And how should a grantee handle this?
Expended is different than drawdown amounts. Let's kind of step back and review that just in case and talk about to revise that. So in your QPR, there is an option for expenditures. And that is an area that you need to go into yourself and enter in that data. Expenditures are outlays that a grantee has had either to third parties, subrecipients, developers, contractors, etc., or internally, i.e. staff time and expenses. So your expenditures does not correlate always with your draws. You might have had $1 million of expenditures that you have a grantee has done, but you've only drawn down $800,000 of that, for example, as your, the $200,000 maybe is still going through internal processing that you have. So you'll put that amount expended at the end of every quarter just to talk about and show your progress, irregardless of your draws.
And typically it is, the way I characterize it is, again, it tends to be the drawdown means monies come from Treasury to the grantee accounts, and a lot of times the unexpended is, it's money's coming from a grantee account somewhere else, to cover their expenses or, again, to subrecipients. But so the key thing is that DRGR will not know anything. Drawdown is going to be automatic, and it's calculated by the system. But in expenditures, there's no way for DRGR to know it. So the biggest difference is, going to be that, again, yes, well, they both are going to be incremental, but the one you can edit, the other, you have to, one's more on a quarterly basis and one's more transactional, the individual draws.
So to revise the drawdown, you actually have to go in and revise your vouchers and do that kind of revision. But the expenditure revisions are just happen every quarterly when you enter in your expenditure data. So if you did a prior period error on your expenditures, i.e. you said 1.1 million and it should only be 1, please just do an internal reconciliation on that for the next quarter. And you might want to make a note of that as well in your narrative. And then I think, George, you had an add-on question of it could become an issue, though, if you need to revise an expenditure to another activity. Again, you can make that internal reconciliation happen between one activity to another, i.e. demonstrating your next expenditure for that activity. You do the internal reconciliation and show that show that expenditure on the next activity as well. Todd, can we have some more email questions?
Yeah, the next one's a quick one. Will DRGR explain why an action plan or QPR was rejected?
That depends on what your CPD rep has entered. They have an ability to type in some comments in a comment field when they approve and or reject a QPR, and so that would depend on your CPD rep. If you're a CPD rep out there, we do advise that you do put in information of why you are rejecting that, so it becomes both codified as well as helps explain it to your grantee. But if you are a grantee and receive that and you don't have any explanations, even if you have an explanation, you might still want to connect with your CPD rep so you can talk it through so you can make appropriate changes and resubmit.
And let me make a quick clarification, because the HUD comment fields actually are only viewable by HUD.
Oh.
So they're internal. So that was something that's a little confusing for folks. And even I thought the same thing as Janine was thinking.
I apologize for that error.
No, I thought the same thing for quite a long time, too. So one of the things we've done is, though, that since some CPD reps might not know that, is that the MicroStrategy reports that HUD staff and grantees have is slightly different. And one of the ones that the HUD staff has, the field staff, is a spreadsheet of the comments, and they can copy and paste them out of their screens. So they have those two options. The timeout issue that we've always talked about, Janine, is more common to the HUD side too. So one of the things I suggested them is that they type the comments into a Word document or an email, and then they paste them into DRGR for comments. So it's good, that they do put those comments in for audit purposes and tracking them, but it's something that it's not going to be automatic that a grantee would know. So just like we say, it's good for a grantee to say why something. What they've changed, it's great for the CPD rep to let the folks know. But they'll have to do it manually through either attaching that spreadsheet or typing those comments up separately for the grantee.
Thanks, Mark. And Todd, can we have the next email question?
Yep. The next one says, if we created a voucher and approved it, and the funds were drawn down and were received by the grantee, but sometime later, a closing agent returned funds that they had miscalculated at the closing, how does the grantee return those funds in DRGR? And they are not program income funds.
I highly recommend to see if you're able to do an internal reconciliation with that.
Well, and let me tell you that it does have to be accounted for in DRGR, and the two main ways to do that, and it really depends on what your CPD field office says, is either offset a draw, and so that would be an internal reconciliation, but then you'd have to document it in DRGR too, so that a draw would be revised against. A pending draw, you reduce the amount. But typically, especially if something was funds, say, that was ineligible that was returned, then there is a procedure to wire money back to logs. And when that happens, the money shows up as like a negative draw, and it increases your available balance, but it does that at the grant level. So if you go to that DRGR FAQ lookup and say wire funds, it'll give you a spreadsheet of a little attachment and a process of how that gets done. Because it'll get done separately outside of DRGR, it'll show up in DRGR, and then at some point you'll also have to revise that kind of draw to assign those return funds back to the correct activity. Anything else on that, Janine?
No, I was going to say, for definitely the eligible uses, if you do an internal reconciliation, as Mark said, you really want to make sure that you explain why that has been done. So make that pretty clear in your QPRs, so that it demonstrates that you might have done an offset of a draw, i.e. an internal reconciliation during that quarter, and what that meant. And Todd?
Okay, the next question says, on QPRs, fund obligation and expenditure are auto-populated. What could be the issue if this information is not auto-populating?
So actually it's fund obligation and fund drawdowns that are automatically populated as a QPR, not the expenditures. So two things. If your fund obligation and your drawdowns that happen during that quarter, there's two things I like people to look for to make sure that they're calculating the right information for that auto-population. So if your quarter is, for example, ends on December 30th, but you drew down money on January 5th, this could have been an expenditure. Let's say it was for a closing that actually happened in December, but you didn't go into DRGR and draw that money down until the 5th. That will not be part of your quarter that ends in December 30th. It is part of the next quarter because you drew it down on the 5th.
And the same thing might happen, too, with the obligations. Folks sometimes might go at the end of the quarter, a day or two after, and say, oh, I'm going to update all my obligations. If you put it in after the end of the quarter, it will not show up. It's like we've talked about, it's a snapshot of the obligations and the draws, and the expenditures are manually put in. So
that might be one issue I've seen come up a lot for communities when they they thought it was based on the quarter, but yet in the system they didn't obligate or draw during that quarter, and hence the QPR will not automatically pull any information outside of that quarter, irregardless of when you as a grantee actually expended that data. So that would be the first. Again, the expenditures are done by you inserting that information yourself, so that will not be auto-populated. If you're having other information, if, for example, you see a draw that happened and was recorded through logs, etc., on December 25th and you're not seeing that showed up, you'll need to go, again, as we look at the slideshow, you'll want to either DRGR help email and show them screenshots of that information, or you are able to call the help desk on this one, and that will be this 1-800-998-999 number, and have them help you to see if they can reset things or be able to locate the issue and error. But please double check when those draws and obligations happen so that you're certain that it happened during the quarter and what you're talking about. Todd?
Okay. The next question is, how do we split out the 10% for admin from program income? Do we have to spend all admin program income up front, or can it be held?
So we're going to definitely review a lot of these program income questions coming up in the next QBR, but yeah, you are able to by doing the 10% admin, and again, Mark, please jump in here. But that 10% admin currently in DRGR, you're not able to kind of hold it in DRGR and show that holding. Will that be part of the next update?
No, and I really don't know enough about program income and administration to be able to answer anything on that. So, because again, we've been doing things at the program income at the grant level, and we're just now trying to build out those screens.
Okay.
So it's certainly, one of the things I typically look at is, how is it done in IDIS when I'm building, the DRGR screens, to make sure we're as consistent as possible. But right now we don't have any controls, by activity type on the program income. So, and I'm not sure where we're going to go with that. And I kind of have to, answer too that, the main thing you're going to have to do is find out what's the correct policy answer for something like that, and then we'll try to figure out how to do the DRGR workaround if it doesn't work the way it needs to. But that one I kind of end up heading over towards the policy side to some degree.
Doug, we'll be able to get that answer, and we'll definitely have that part of the March 29th webinar so you see exactly how we want to enter that policy into DRGR for you. And Todd?
Okay. The next question is there a time limit on when we are able to draw funds? We are drawing mostly from our program income funds, and they are not drawing from the allotted amount yet.
You do have expenditure deadlines on NSP. Hunter, has there been any alerts or policy alerts yet on defining kind of what expenditure deadlines look like with respect to program income, and are those forthcoming if not?
That probably will be coming out in our closeout notice when we put that out. It's going to be later.
I.e. within a few months, or do you have a kind of time period for that, or not yet?
I don't know yet.
Okay. We'll make sure that that question gets funneled to HUD as a question for trying to figure out the expenditure deadlines and with respect to program income for you, to make sure we get that policy exactly in place, as well as making sure we'll make sure that comes out in the weekly NSP listserv so that it can be spread to the rest of the group. And it looks like we only have about 5 minutes left. Maybe we'll try to grab 2 more questions. Is there any question left as a caller? We can grab 1 caller and 1 email.
Right. Our last caller will be Tara Hood with Housing Trust of Santa Clara County.
Thank you. On slide, I think it was about 56, you showed screenshots of the QPR, and it had the owner totals and the household totals showing on for the beneficiary information.
Is this the screenshot, the View QPR screen?
Actually, the one, then it was 53. It's like,
okay.
It's like the one before that, I think. I know it's in that range. That one. Right. And then you had another one that behind it that showed the low income and everything. If we don't, like my screen doesn't look like this, but the QPR screen that you just had up that shows the QPR report matches exactly, but I'm not seeing owner and total household. So I've been working with the DRGR help desk trying to correct our data, but my screen doesn't look like this, even though the action plan looks just like you showed it, the QPR looks just like you showed it. It's just this data entry screen does not look like this. Is it supposed to look like this?
This is one of the ones that I think that they're working with me on, and I have not been able to get to it yet.
Okay.
So this is one that they've kind of exhausted everything that they know, and they're shooting it to me. My problem is I've got a whole hopper of health questions.
Okay.
So I'm going to try to get to it as quickly as I can and work through. But I'll probably try to, since I've got the information, they forward it to me. I was going to try to use our grantee simulator to see what I could do on my end.
Okay. Great.
And so then I'll be touching base with you to make sure that I'm putting in the information correctly so I can see if I'm experiencing the same issues you are.
Okay, but should I be able to see both of those fields?
If you selected owner on the action plan side,
yes,
and household, if those both show on the action plan side, then you're supposed to see these both all these columns here.
Yeah, and so I even went back in and unclicked and reclicked and resubmitted my action plan to our head rep and had her go in and do it, trying to get it to show up, and I did that twice and it still doesn't show up, so I just wanted to make sure that
it's supposed to. If we've selected the benefit type, that kind of category, it's supposed to. So I'll have to look to see what we've done. So we've done a lot of data corrections, when we did a migration.
Right.
There might be something that's set up, that's kind of like an internal error, because when we migrated the data, it circumvented a bunch of the business rules.
Yeah, now I think when I said on the last DRGR one, and you mentioned that, and mine was one of the ones that was pre-populated with negative numbers before I even went in there and did anything.
Yeah, so what we have to look is to see, was there something as part of the September 2010 migration that's affecting this? Either the pre-selections or the activity types, all sorts of stuff. Which activity type is it?
This is for our, it's a loan is for the activity B, eligibility B.
No, but the activity type, is it acquisition?
Yeah, acquisition rehab.
Yeah, but the activity type in DRGR is either acquisition or rehab. So the ones where you have the hardest time with the QPR side is if it's been selected as acquisition and not rehab.
Okay.
So that's where we end up running a lot of the problems. That's why I was emphasizing, us not splitting when it's the same number of properties in and out, in both activities.
Right.
Is that wherever possible, and this is a real important thing, is that if it's one activity and only one activity and you have a choice between acquisition and rehab, and it really is rehab as the end use, you want to make sure it's the rehab selected.
Yeah, and this particular one is actually acquisition.
So the problem is that, again, it's going to affect what you can even put in on the DRGR side, on the QPR side. So that might be our issue, is that it's not going to let you do beneficiary data if it's listed as acquisition.
Okay. Good. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So I'll try to get back with you, and then we'll see if that is the issue or if it's something else.
Okay, and then what I'll do in the interim, we do have two other lines for the AC rehab that are just, when we went in and collapsed, that they're just acquisition. I'll change those to rehab and see if the screen changes.
Yeah, look, definitely try to see about that.
Okay.
Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that you're not going to have any actuals. It's going to say, it's only supposed to be survey method or census, like Janine mentioned. And so it's going to limit you on this. Yeah,
because it allowed me to put in all of our beneficiary data, the listings on what we plan to, our outcomes, our performance measures and everything on both of them, and they show up on the, when I run the reports.
Okay, well, that's probably, I'm betting that's it, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I'm going to take one last question, and I do want to note, I see that we have not answered all the questions, about 3 or 4 still outstanding questions. I will personally follow up with you in the next 24 to 48 hours, if as long as when you enter it into the system for this live meeting that your email is correct. So we'll do that follow-up. The final question is from Judy, and she had said, are there previous rehab performance measures, such as counting the number of low-flow toilets, lighting, etc., placed in a rehab unit no longer needed or counted? Those examples of performance measures are definitely still in the system. There is FHEO data, the race and ethnicity, that have been added to the system for you to count. Those are examples of highly recommended performance measures like the low-flow toilets and lighting, etc., that you may count to demonstrate some of the green rehab that you have done.
Janine, can I actually clarify that real
please.
quick? It's my understanding that actually those are, those measures, the green measures, are required for NSP2. So they're required under the ARRA programs. So they're not required under NSP1 HERA. But, if you have them, that's great information to give us. But it is required under ARRA programs.
Right. They're definitely green measures that are required. And it's determined on what you're counting as your green measures and which you'll put in there for NSP2. So we are at our end of our 2 hours. And we'll be coming to a close again. I do see that there are outstanding questions. We will follow up with you guys personally for those that have entered their email addresses into the live meeting to answer those questions.
And that does complete today's web seminar. Thank you for your participation and best of luck with your NSP implementation.